but this isn't like World War II, you're in some bomb shelter where somebody's like sawing off your leg with a stick. Hey guys, welcome back to the Girl Gone London channel. If you're new here, my name is Caitlin. I've lived in the UK for almost 10 years as an American expat, and today I am going to talk about the pros and cons and my experience of the NHS. First things first, let's just jump right into it because I feel like this video is actually really important for me to make because there's a lot of questions in America about what it might be like to have a nationalized health service. There's a lot of fear mongering about the experience, and I feel like people might have heard of the NHS even more in today's day and age. Again, given the situation, when you see articles about the UK and about their response to the situation, you might hear them talk about the NHS. And part of the reason why the UK currently is doing really good in their vaccine production and their vaccine dispersal, vaccine giving, vaccine rollout is because there is a centralized health system here. And so when the NHS took charge of the vaccine rollout, it was so easy. They've got everybody's contact details who is registered, which is basically everybody in the UK, and everybody kind of knows the drill, and it's just probably a lot easier to roll out than in somewhere where it might be slightly more disjointed. So let's first say, what is the NHS? The NHS is the National Health Service. So when we talk about it, I'm referring to just the NHS in the UK. There are some differences, and there's NHS England, NHS Scotland, Wales, and then Northern Ireland has its own name. It's not actually NHS, but similar. And so each kind of devolved country is in charge of their own healthcare system, but it's all also one, if that doesn't really make sense, but just go with me here. Let's just talk about the NHS, and it applies to most of the UK. So the NHS is the National Health Service, and it basically means that the healthcare system here is nationalized. It is not by default private like it is in the US. So what does that mean? Well, it means a lot of different things, and it means some positive things and it means some negative things. And I'm going to talk about my own experience with the NHS throughout this video to kind of give you my perspective, but this can be very different from someone else. So, you know, always do your research and take what I'm saying with a grain of salt because I'm one person, but I will speak to my honest NHS experience. Okay, so how is this paid for? So the NHS isn't strictly free, in the sense that we do pay for it through our taxes. So British people are accustomed to paying more taxes through their employer, or if they're self-employed at the end of the year, in order to go towards the greater good and to help fund the NHS. Obviously there is other funding, but a lot of it has to do with higher taxes means that we can afford a nationalized health service, or at least we hope we can afford. There obviously is always some struggle with funding at times, but in general, yes, the argument that it is not free is true because we have higher taxes, but as I'll get into, the fact that I don't have to worry about the cost of an ambulance really is something that I am definitely a fan of, so I don't mind paying those higher taxes. Now, how does it work when you have an emergency in the UK? So if you have an emergency, you would go, I mean, there's multiple different things I could talk about and different lines you can call and blah, 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 but let's just say basics. If you have an emergency, you go to the local A&E, which is an ER. They call it the accident and emergency. Or I call 999, not 911, 999 is the emergency number here in the UK, and they send an ambulance out to you. They would take you then to the hospital, and emergency treatment in the UK for anybody is free. If you are here as a visitor and you have an emergency and you break your arm and you need to go to the hospital, that care, because it is emergency care, would be free. Follow-ups and medications and things like that, as a visitor who does not pay into the NHS, you would then technically be on the line for owing some money. It's not going to be as much money as you pay in the US, but for everybody, no matter where you're from, emergency treatment in the UK is free. And this is life-changing for some people. I used to work with Americans who were visiting the UK, and they would have an emergency and not do anything about it, or like panic about calling an ambulance because they thought they were going to be hit with a bill. British people find it so strange that you could be billed for needing an ambulance. Same thing with childbirth. You don't pay on the NHS when you're having a baby. Like, that's an emergency. That thing needs to come out of you. The idea that the hospital is then going to send you a bill for having a child is just so foreign to them. Overall, emergency means you go to A&E, you get an ambulance by calling 999, and point of care service for the emergency is free. I have been to multiple A&Es in my like 10 years here, and I have had to wait similar to how you would in an American hospital, but I think the longest I've waited was like 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, when I came in with something that maybe wasn't as much of an emergency, but I was a student and I didn't understand how to use the healthcare system. I hadn't registered with a doctor, and I was pretty sure I had bronchitis or something I just couldn't shake. So I went to A&E, and they do kind of triage you a bit. So if you come in not breathing, they're going to take you right away. If you come in saying, I think I have bronchitis, you're going to have to wait. But overall, I have been to the A&E multiple times and have had no negative experiences. And I'll talk a little bit about like what it actually looks like inside hospitals in a minute. But in terms of the actual A&E experience, not really that much different to an emergency room. Let's talk about how it works when you don't have an emergency. So because it is a nationalized system, it's actually really easy to find your doctor because it's based on your postcode, what Americans would call a zip code. Sometimes you'll have a choice if there's multiple in the area. Sometimes you won't. It might be that you live in a village and there is the doctor's office for the village, and that's the one that you go to. Now, they also call doctor's offices doctor's surgeries, and I was really confused when I first moved here because I was like, why is everyone having surgery? Like, everyone I talked to was like, well, you should register for the surgery. And I was like, I don't need surgery. I think I just have bronchitis. But they call a doctor's office a doctor's surgery. No actual surgery performed there. So you would register with your local GP, general practitioner, they call it, basically a family doctor. Within the GP, there are going to be multiple doctors. Say there's 10 doctors. Every time I make an appointment, I can request a certain doctor, and the receptionist or the online system will tell me when the next appointment with that doctor is. However, many people simply book an appointment and it's with whichever doctor. So the idea that you have one doctor isn't really the case here. You can make it the case if you are like adamant about just seeing this one person, but a lot of people consider all of the doctors at their doctor's office experts and professionals, and they're just willing to talk to the next person that's available about their problem. So they consider kind of all of the doctors at that doctor's surgery to be their doctor. This obviously does have some downsides when it comes into having to explain your situation if it's ongoing to a new doctor, and I found that a little in the past. We prefer to go to the same one, but if that person's not available and we really need help, then that's fine, we'll go to someone else. But I do like the idea of the American way of having one doctor who is your doctor for continuity of care, but they take great records and the doctors will just pull up your file, all of your lab work, all of your stuff. I haven't been negatively affected by going to multiple different doctors, but I do see how Americans do like the one doctor per person kind of system. So you book an appointment with the GP, it's about 10 minutes long, and there is definitely kind of, you feel a pressure, not necessarily by the doctor, but just by the system to make sure that you're not going too far over and above your limit because they have other patients to see. That can be a downside of the NHS, where they have a lot more people to serve and they are limited on time, but you can book a double appointment if you need to, and a doctor is not going to rush you out after 10 minutes. If you keep bringing up a whole list of extra problems that are related to your initial problem, they might say, you know, seeing as how this is an emergency, let's make you another appointment to come back in. But overall, I haven't had any really negative experiences with feeling like 10 minutes is not enough, because you go in, you say your problem, you talk about it, and they refer you on, or they prescribe you medication, or give you their verbal advice, and then you go on your way. Now, let's talk about referrals. So again, there's a lot to talk about with the NHS. So Sorry if you're getting slightly lost in all of the different things. Leave your questions down below. But so a referral would mean that you go to the GP, you say, I have a problem with my skin. They look at it and they say, yeah, I do think that might be a problem. Sometimes they would just say, oh, it's this. Here's this medication, or you're going to be fine, or whatever. But sometimes they might say, yes, I think we should have a specialist look at that. And then they refer you onto a specialist, so a dermatologist or a gynecologist or a podiatrist or any number of specialists. And so what this means is that on the NHS, you do not have direct access to a specialist until you go through your GP. Once your GP refers you on and you then have appointments with the specialist, again, an NHS specialist, can then make appointments with you directly there. So when I had to go to the dermatologist a few years ago and I went on Accutane and I had to do multiple follow-ups, I didn't have to go to my GP every single time to get another appointment with the dermatologist. Once I was in the dermatologist system and I had been referred by the GP, then I was able to make appointments directly through them. There are pros and cons to this as well. The pros being that a lot of things your GP can take care of, so they don't have to overload the specialist. Again, a GP is very highly trained and there's so many things that they can just say, you don't need a dermatologist, I know what this is, and here's the solution. But obviously the cons being that there is kind of a hoop to jump through every single time you feel like you need to see a specialist. So again, pros and cons. Now let's talk about prescription costs, because this is going to be an area where the NHS is a pro times 100 million. It's priceless. So in certain countries, in Scotland, you don't even have to pay for prescriptions. In England, you do, but it's about, I think it's currently £9-ish. It hovers like £8-9 per prescription, no matter the prescription. And that would be like when I went on Accutane, which is a very, very, very expensive prescription in the US. When I went on it, my month-long Accutane treatment until my next dermatology appointment was like £8 every time. So what it would have cost me on the US system versus the UK system is just not comparable. And they do have regular pharmacies. There's usually pharmacies within the doctor's offices. And if you are pregnant, your prescriptions are free. I think students get them free. There are plenty of people who also in England get them free. Birth control is free. Again, I say free. Yes, we do pay higher taxes for these kinds of things, but on an individual level, the idea that I can not worry about what's being prescribed to me and if it's expensive or generic or this or that is truly one of the best parts of the NHS. Okay, let's talk about the quality of care and doctors on the NHS. I can only speak to my experience, and my experience has been, I have never had an experience where I felt like I was not getting quality care and quality treatment by an experienced doctor. The NHS is not some sort of like second rate, you don't have to do as much schooling because it's not private. Like, the doctors are well-trained experts in their fields, and a lot of NHS doctors will also work privately as well sometimes, which we'll talk about in a second. So even going private here doesn't mean that you're getting a doctor with more experience or more knowledge. The NHS is filled with amazing, educated doctors, and I have never ever felt like the doctor, him or herself, wasn't giving me the best treatment that they thought possible. Now, that does bring me on to what I would consider to be a con from my perspective, but that's from an American perspective that was very used to being able to basically just like demand whatever tests and medication I wanted. Here in the UK, there's a much more conservative approach overall in not doing testing if they feel like you need it, but doing extensive testing for what they feel like is no reason. There's more of a wait and see kind of approach sometimes, whereas I feel like in America, we would be like, well, you're paying for this anyway, so if you want an MRI, go get the MRI. Whereas here, it is a nationalized system. Everybody needs to be helped and supported. So they're not necessarily going to just throw the book at everybody who comes in with a stomach ache. They're going to wait and see. And as things progress, or if they see warning signs or you talk about anything that raises a red flag, then you will get referred on to whatever tests that you need. But I feel like I have to be an advocate here for myself a lot more than in America, where my doctor would almost be like, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. Whereas here, I definitely feel like I have to go in like knowing what solution I want and what kind of testing I would be comfortable with. And again, I said I would be honest in this video, so that is a little bit of a con for me. And I know a lot of American expats really struggle to adapt to this kind of situation. But at the end of the day, taking responsibility for your own health and learning to be the squeaky wheel isn't necessarily the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And I've never been adversely affected by anything like that. I have always, I want to say, gotten what I wanted, which is true. I've always gone in saying, you know, I have really bad acne. This was years ago, and I really want to try Accutane. My dermatologist in America had recommended it, and the UK doctor was like, well, I'm not sure that it's bad enough for Accutane, how we would prescribe it here. And I was like, listen, please. And they were like, okay. Yeah, there's a bit more of a conservative wait and see approach, but that's also kind of just UK culture in general, right? Like, Americans are like, there's a problem, let's all rush to it, and like, you know, do all of these kinds of things. And the Brits are like, why don't we just stay calm and see what happens? So I'm not completely saying this is like an NHS problem. This is like a British culture thing, but definitely expect a more conservative approach and a more wait and see approach to treatment. Now, that being said, if there are any red flags or they suspect that something could be cancerous or could be a serious problem, there is a fast track to referral. So it is, I believe, a 2-week promise of, if they see any warning signs of anything serious, they will make sure that you are seen by the specialist or that you have the test or whatever you need to have within 2 weeks. To an American, this seems like a long time, because I'm used to saying, well, I'm free tomorrow. If you think I have this problem, like, I will show up tomorrow. Here, it is 2 weeks, but the NHS also has like incredible cancer care, cancer treatment. Like, they know what they're doing. It's just a little bit slightly longer of a timeline. But if you are suspected to have a serious problem, and I'm not talking about during these times, because I know there is pressure on the NHS to deal with the other situation, but in normal times, if you have a serious problem, you are going to be seen by somebody and you are going to be in the system. You're not going to be waiting like 6 months if they suspect that you have cancer or something like that. Okay, so I have one more con and the ultimate pro to end on. So the other con, in my experience as an American using the NHS, is that the quality of the actual buildings and the environment in the hospitals and in the doctor's offices, they're just not as flashy as those in America. And you know what? That makes sense. The money that the NHS has needs to go into the life-saving treatments and the doctors and the actual things that matter, as opposed to me being like, well, my doctor's office doesn't feel like I'm sitting in like the living room of a 5-star hotel, which sometimes it does in America. And, you know, American hospitals in general, like, some of them are really beautiful. It feels like a hotel. I used to work at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, and that place was like Disney World for kids. And it was just gorgeous. And that same kind of flashiness, first of all, it doesn't exist here in the UK overall. Secondly, it doesn't exist on the NHS simply because they're maintaining the buildings, but they're not going to choose for a fresh coat of paint to go before the MRI machine that is actually going to impact people's healthcare. So it can feel at times, as an American using the NHS, that you would go into the physical surroundings and it just doesn't look like as bright and sparkly as I'm used to. But that's a small price to pay for the ultimate pro, which is I never worry about coming down with any sort of serious illness and what financial impact that could have on me and my husband. I never have to worry. If I get appendicitis in the middle of the night and have to go to the hospital, I don't worry about the bill. If I just need a regular doctor's appointment, I don't have to worry about the copay or how much I need to pay and is it worth it paying? Is my problem bad enough? I just make an appointment. And that freedom is something a lot of expats here in the UK really value, and what prevents a lot of people actually from moving back to America, because on the whole, we can talk about, you know, the differences in how the hospitals look, and maybe you're not always going to get a private room. Often you're not. You might be on sort of more of a ward, but you're not being, this isn't like World War II, you're in some bomb shelter where somebody's like sawing off your leg with a stick. This is a modern, functioning, in some ways very innovative health service. And the fact that you get that for paying higher taxes but without the individual concerns over going bankrupt because you have a serious illness is pretty much priceless. I mean, British people look at American like GoFundMes when people have some sort of medical problem and are both shocked and horrified and really sad for those people that has to be part of their life, that you could lose all of your life savings because of something that your body did to you that you didn't even have any control over. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the video on the NHS. I hope that you've learned something. I hope that your mind has been opened in some way to talking about the differences and pros and cons. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the video on the NHS. I hope you enjoyed. Leave your questions below. Again, I would love to have a dialogue about the pros and cons of the NHS versus other healthcare systems around the world. Nothing is perfect, but I do feel very grateful to be able to use the NHS while I'm here in the UK. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more UK, British, and expat content, and I'll see you next time.